All right, Eric. So right off the bat, you had me intrigued because you use a lot of animal representation in the idea of helping people understand their personalities. So talk to me about it a little bit.
You know, so there's a lot of different personality typing methodologies, and I used to study it a lot when I was a kid. But they all have like letters, like MBTI is all about letter combos, and like people start forgetting. Like you talk to someone and like, yeah, I take this test and I got like an I, L, M, J. Like they don't remember that stuff. But I think when we use animals, I think there's a very clear symbolism there. Like if you tell someone, oh, you're a fox personality type. I think everyone knows kind of, oh, what that means. And generally, foxes like being foxes because I think we think of like foxes as being crafty and clever and shrewd, getting themselves out of traps easily. And I think in terms of a fox personality type, they're a lot like that. So I tend to use animals because I think people have an easy connect to animals. I don't know if that's how you found out or found it in your line of work.
Well, actually, yeah, there's a lot of that, but I've also found that by watching their behavior, because of the fact that they don't live in a story, they can't create anything around what they're doing. They're just living in the moment.
Hmm.
We're able to identify and see some of our own traits and better understand the way that we interact with the world. I'll give you a great example and something that I love to share. It's a really fun story looking back now. Is a few years back at the height of the rut and deer season. It's the height of deer breeding season. I was out hunting, sitting in a tree in the middle of a blizzard, really extremely cold that day. And one of the rules that I hold myself to is I won't try to harvest a deer that I've never seen before.
Hmm.
Now, this beautiful, beautiful, amazing young buck with a huge rack come out of nowhere. I'd never seen him before, so I didn't pull on him, and I'm standing there going, dude, I call myself a hunter. Why am I not shooting this thing? What am I doing? Right. And I thought about the things that were sitting on my heart, mostly at the time, struggling with anxiety. And it clicked. I was like, if I named him Longhorn. So if Longhorn is out here in the middle of the day making all of these dramatic mistakes that could get him killed, especially right in that moment, then there's got to be something to it. And I thought about my anxiety and how it correlates because he put himself in that position knowing that in the back of his mind, even though he had a mission to procreate his species, he has the skill set to at least neutralize a threat. You know, if he runs into danger, he's got a backup plan in his mind. So the way that correlates with the anxiety is granted, we don't live in a life and death kind of world, but a panic attack, if you're familiar with one, feels like it at the moment. You know, it's like life is going to end if I take another step. And I forget that I have all of these skills that I've acquired throughout life that can relieve the situation, help me overcome whatever little hiccups may come along the way. So then, as I thought deeper into that, I'm like, if I put myself in his hoops, I can accomplish whatever it is that this panic attack is telling me that I can't overcome or achieve.
I like that connecting back to like our natural instincts, right? Like, especially when you think of animals, they probably have to deal with a lot harder things. I would say more difficult, not necessarily more difficult, but more dangerous things than we do, right? Like they're
Exactly.
like a life and death scenario every day for them. For us, we get upset when, our latte, they're out of sugar or something. So
Right.
there's something to that.
But yeah, I mean, it was like one of those moments where like the first moments that I really started to click as I was reading into it and starting to familiarize myself with it. And then I thought about, the different Native American stories and how they incorporate animals and plants and really everything within the living world into these stories to help them better understand the way that they interact with it, the way that their personality can come out, the way that they can speak their truth and ultimately how they can better help and serve a community.
Right. And I think sometimes we just get so stuck. I mean, I know you're outdoors now and it looks great. And I think we get so like internalized with our own insular community of humans, I guess, that we kind of forget that there's other living organisms out there, right? That we
Exactly.
come from. But
So tell me more about how you built this little structure that you utilize to help people better understand themselves.
like I owned an education company for about a decade. And in that education company, we worked with maybe 1,000 students a year. And so that's kind of where I started developing the system based on a lot of personality typing methodologies that I had studied previously. And it's really cool working with students because you get to see like how they respond to different biases. Like a lot of teachers have this very similar personality type, right? So they're all about safety and security and creating a nice confined space where kids can learn by following the rules and doing and having a certain structure. Um, but what I found is not everybody is like that. Not everyone is the kindergarten teacher, right? And everyone, even kindergarten teachers know, like half the class listens to the rules and does what they tell them. About a third of the class, though, is like running around and grabbing things and throwing things and like learning that way. So I really started developing the system based on how I saw the students and how they responded to the different personalities of their teachers. And I would say the biggest difference with my personality typing methodology is a lot of personality typing methodologies tend to focus on like the externals, like, oh, what is this person good at? Or do they talk a lot? Do they not talk a lot? Whereas my methodology focuses more on what does a person value the most? Like if you gave them a choice between this and this, which thing are they going to choose more often than not? Because I think sometimes we think our values are the same, but I think our values differ from person to person. And I think that's why we have so much conflict in the world, right? Is we accept superficial differences, but we're very quick to assume that the people around us value the same things we do. But yeah, so I just started developing that, and I started the more and more observations and practical knowledge that I gained from working with all these students helped me like bring it to where it is today.
See, what I really dig into and what really comes to mind that I love about that idea and that concept is the fact that it really removes the labels. I mean, we go through our lives and people like to attach these labels to us. They like to tell us these things, whether we want to or not. Somehow they end up becoming a part of who we are because we find like I don't know, it's like we're hungry for validation
Yeah,
externally.
yeah, I think
And
yeah. Oh no, sorry, go ahead.
no, go for
Oh, I was gonna say yeah, like the problem is with that validation is it comes from outside, right? It's like someone else's value, and if those values don't necessarily match with your values, then basically you're living a life that's not really your own, right? You're just like going based on what people tell you should want.
exactly. They're essentially trying to take away the ability for you to express your voice
Right.
because it doesn't agree with what they are. And it develops a lot of fear because we all want to fit in. We all want to be a part of something. That's just the natural order of how we are. Now, what I do as far as when I'm out with people is I like to instill this sense of self-worth, the self-value through obviously through the teaching of but it revolves around outdoor skills, you know, fire building, building a shelter, so on and so forth. And the reason that that's become so important and such a fundamental part of of how I present things is because that was exactly what got me out of that trap of allowing people to add or subtract to the value that I perceived that I had based off of the way that they would interact with me. Like for a great example, but a lot of my transition in this part of my journey began based on my second divorce, where my value was completely stripped away from me. And the safest place in the world for me is the wilderness, getting out here in the field and doing different things that it presents an outside the box sort of skill set that nobody could ever take away from me. When I thought about driving to my day job and having to interact with everything, it brought back that familiarity, which brought out that confidence, that mastery, and ultimately sparks a new sense of self value and self worth.
You know, it's funny that you mentioned the outdoors. So I was a Boy Scout, and and that's actually where I learned a lot about different personalities, because as a Boy Scout, you're outdoors and you have different things you have to do. But you're also part of patrols. I guess it's like being, and the way our scout troop ran, we kind of ran it like a mini military. So we had patrols, and we were very serious, and we had like we were very orderly. We did a lot of push-ups, as I recall. But it was a lot of like, how do we build a fire quickly? How do we set up a shelter if like out in the woods? But you have to work as a team. And I started realizing, oh, like everyone kind of, all the kids around me, they actually are different. Their personalities are really different in a lot of ways. So how do I engage with this person and to get them to do the same thing that this person should be doing, even though they have different personalities? Like what's the best way to motivate them as a team? And yeah, so I had a lot of my epiphanies, at least personality epiphanies, outdoors as well, because I learned a lot about that through the scouts. But
Yeah, and I think it really speaks to the fact that even whether it's in your personal life or in a professional setting, you have to understand that each member of the team is going to contribute something, and they're not going to be able to really contribute to the whole picture. They just bring a piece of the pie. So there's no reason to look down upon something that they're not so good at just because you are. And to me, to bring it back to nature, it really makes me think about the overall idea of a circle. We choose to talk about a circle as a representation because they're around us all the time. But within that circle, if you think about it, there's grandfather's son, whose strength is to feed and nourish everything with warmth in order to grow and thrive. That gets down to the plants and the grass, the trees and everything like that grow, which feed the animals. Now, the trees aren't going to get up and walk around and give us something beautiful to look at. So we can't fault them for that. Then there's the animals. The animals rely on all the plants and animals, or on all the plants and everything, and they give us nourishment. We rely on everything else in the world, you know, in the living world. But now, if you think about our weaknesses, we're the ones that are destroying the earth with our practices and our way of life. But yet, everything else on earth doesn't judge us for that. Instead, they find a way to bring balance and utilize their strengths to offset our weaknesses, while our strengths provide them a better ability to live and navigate through the world.
yeah, I totally get the idea of strengths and weaknesses, because I feel like our strengths and weaknesses, our strengths come from our weaknesses, right? Like I feel like,
Exactly.
like if you think someone is really responsible and really organized, at their worst, their weakness is definitely going to be something related to that, right? It might be maybe they're too rigid, or maybe they're too judgmental. Very rarely are you going to see the person who is like spontaneous and like free flowing be rigid and judgmental. I mean, their weakness is probably going to be that they're flaky or irresponsible. But I think you're right. Like we can all balance off of each other. I mean, even in the book, I tend to I split people into four groups, and within those four groups, I symbolize them by roles that people would have like in a medieval village. So like I say hunters, we have gatherers, we got shamans, and we have smiths. And like each person has a role within a village. Like the gatherers do their thing, the hunters do their thing, but their skills are going, like gatherer skills are going to work for them. They tend to be sturdier, they tend to be um, more responsible, maybe a little physically stronger. Hunters tend to be quicker, shrewder. They'll take more chances because, of course, they have to, because they're hunting. And I feel like that kind of holds true with life too. We have firefighters who take chances every day, paramedics, and they have to be like always on, and putting out fires. But then we also have the people who are really steady and balanced and grounded. And there are teachers, there are police officers, there are probably in the military, people who hold together lots of this parts of our civilization. And I think sometimes those types of people can judge the other people and be like, oh, why can't you be more like me? But it's like, do you really want them to be more like you? Because then we wouldn't have their skills, right? Like if you can't tell a really conservative, cautious person can't tell a firefighter, no, you need to be more like me and not take so many chances. Because how are they going to be able to do their job? Right. So I feel like the balance, you're right. It's great. It is a lot like nature. Like we have what we need. And as long as we stay true to what we really are. But when you start like trying to be other things and trying to makes things something they're not, then I think things get out of whack.
That's where I feel through my experiences, and especially in the workplace, we lose sight of it. The fact that there should be that free flow, that give and take. It's always, well, you're not moving as quick as I am. You're not doing this as fast as I am. Or, why can't you just do it this way? We don't give ourselves the grace to allow somebody to just be themselves nowadays. It's more just, we got to figure out a way to get the results, and who cares about all the rest?
Yeah, I think so. When I was owning my education company, one of the things I would always tell my teachers would be like, just imagine this kind of kid. They're not like you, and they have this personality where you have a cookie jar and you tell them, and you're their parent, and you say, oh, if you grab a cookie from there, I'm going to slap you. And I'm like, this type of kid, what they're thinking about is, is the cookie worth the slap? And you tell a lot of teachers that they have a different personality. They're like, no, no, you don't. Wait, what? No, as a parent, you're telling your kid that because you're telling them I'm your parent and I'm telling you do not grab that cookie and you should listen to me because I'm an authority, right? But like some personalities will just be like, no, I don't know. Maybe a slap is worth the cookie, and if it is, then I'm going to grab that cookie and eat it and enjoy it, and then take my slap, And I think it's that surprise when people are like, whoa, like people just have to accept that people think very differently than they do, and that way, and they shouldn't try to pressure them to be like them, right?
Yeah, most definitely. You know, a lot of the time, it seems as if we try to mute what's really inside because we're uncomfortable. We're scared that somebody can be different than us.
Hmm.
And instead of opening up and being willing to learn from somebody else's traits, or seeing how it can better help us build a vocabulary to define the chapter of our life we're living in, we want to knock them down. And if we really took a lot of time to explore inwardly, we would see how that puzzle, how all those different pieces come together and build that vocabulary. Just one simple syllable at a time.
Yeah, I like the idea of learning from other personalities because we can, as long as I guess I always say, like, you want to find your anchor first. Like, who are you? Don't let anyone find your anchor so people aren't like pushing you off that and telling you to be something you're not. But then once you do, the best thing is like, okay, now that you know your anchor and you know who you are, then you're also going to know your weaknesses. So you can maybe borrow something. Like if I know the weakness of my personality type is I don't always finish the things that I start. Like that's like a major weakness, and I knew it very early. So I'm like, well, maybe I should take from other personality types that are really good at finishing what they start, and maybe borrow some of their techniques. How do they get stuff finished? How do they how do they complete the tasks that they start? And I'm not perfect at it, but I do think I'm better than when I started my life journey.
See, and I love that example because it's been a lot of what's helped me to grow personally, is looking back at people that have come before me and learning about my strengths and my weaknesses through reading about and learning about their journey, their progression through life, the things that they did, how they did so, and how they came to discover themselves through it. there's a great Lakota story that it's based around the idea of learning purpose and understanding that we all have a purpose in life. But there's this young child that was born to this man and woman that they tried for many years to have a kid. They never did, and then finally he came along. And as he grew up, he learned how to hunt, he learned how to gather and do all the different things. But he was just simply there. It was really strange how he could walk through camp and nobody would notice him, nobody would acknowledge him. He never had a war feather. He never was invited to any of the war clubs, anything like that. And eventually, he did finally find a wife, and his parents passed on. And he thought his purpose in life was to raise this child, but he felt very alone. So he would go off into the wilderness and really get to intimately know all the trails and everything like that. And one day he came back from one of his hikes and he found out that all the men had gone off on a war raid. And then come the next day, one of the scouts come back, said that there was a rival war party coming to attack the camp. All that was left at camp was the older men, the women, the children, who could only move so fast. So they were scrambling around what to do. And he knew all these trails. So he mentioned that there was a trail that led to a peak where they could get to within a day and easily defend themselves, protect themselves. And that's what they ended up doing. So when the rival party caught up with them, they tried to scale the hill and they were fended off. They finally ran away. When the war party came back and they discussed what happened, he got the acknowledgement out of it. And they honored him by bringing him in whenever there was time to move camp. And they gave him a new name, which they ultimately named him Good Trail, because he continued to just embrace who he was. Even though it was lonely, it was scary, that introverted part of him that was probably hard to accept because he'd see everybody else around him enjoying the company with other people was something that he learned to embrace and found his purpose through it. And I feel like the more that we understand our personalities and the things that we go through throughout our journey, it defines our purpose and ultimately leads us to those good trails that are individually and uniquely forged just for us.
Yeah, I love that. I love that story and that idea of that. I mean, the symbolism of the actual trail, right? Because that trail is like our journey, and everyone
Right.
has a trail. I always use Einstein as an example in different personalities because like a lot of times what we're inundated with are like commercials and shows. Like you watch like a Lexus commercial and it's always the same thing, right? It's a beautiful family. The parents are a little young for having a kid that old, but like, and they drive a nice Lexus and they live in this beautiful house and it's Christmas time. And I think oftentimes what we're told is, oh, you should want to have children and raise a family. And that's great. And I think that's great for a lot of people. And a lot of people do value their family like number one. But I'm always like, when's the last time we heard about Einstein's family? Like when's the
Right.
last time you heard about, and he did have a daughter. Was he the greatest dad? Apparently not. But he had his own path, and his path was clearly like exploring like ideas and like the world and the universe. And the nice thing is like we've all benefited from that, right? Like all his ideas led to things that we can all like we wouldn't have a remote control if it wasn't for Einstein. And so I think when we stay true to like that, like the Dakota in your story, because he went off on his own and did these things, maybe I don't know if people made fun of him or not, but like they might have made him an outcast or whatever. But then when it came down to when they really needed it, that's all his knowledge came in handy.
And that's where, understanding your personality really comes in, whether we're doing so through conversations like this, or we step into a counseling office, sit down on the couch, and kind of spill our guts and get a perspective on it. It's that perspective that really helps us to hone those strengths and not turn away from our weaknesses.
Hmm.
So using symbolism, whether it's through storytelling or taking a test and discovering what animal you best represent, it's just another piece of that puzzle that it gets back to preparing yourself for whatever may lay ahead, because we don't need to know what's coming ahead, what's coming down the line. We just got to be taking steps to further ourselves, to better ourselves, to be ready for those challenges when they meet.
Right. And I think so many people are so focused on like just reacting and doing things in what's in front of them, and they don't take that time to think, what do I really want to do? Like reflecting, what is my actual path, right? Like what is my personality? Like I think a lot of people just assume they know their personality because I'm me, so thus I know who I am. But I often find, I work with a lot of parents, and a lot of parents often feel, oh, I know who my kid is because I know what their favorite ice cream was when they were 8 years old. And I'm like, that's great. And that's not to say, I'm not saying that that's kind of stuff is not important as well. But I've sometimes they don't know what their kid values and what their kid really likes. And so then they're trying to push them off on things that, have nothing to do with what their kid actually might be good at and what they might really want to do with their life. Um, like the story I always tell is because it happened not recently, now it's been like 6 months, but on New Year's, I was at a New Year's party, a family New Year's party, and my uncle had ordered these oysters. So I was shucking these oysters, right? Because I apparently I'm the only one who knows how to shuck them. And I was like, oh, like I asked my cousin's kid, hey, why don't you come help me? I'll show you how to shuck the oysters because there are a lot of them. And we got to talking, and he had just graduated pharmacy school. And I was like, oh, okay. So like, what do you want to do now? Like, and he's like, I don't know, but as long as it's a job where I don't have to be in the same place all day long. And I was like, you just graduated from pharmacy school. You picked the wrong school, buddy, because that's all
Yeah.
pharmacists do. And I was like, well, but the nice thing is knowing his personality, which I did, I was like, oh, you might want to try pharmaceutical sales. That might be something that you'd be really interested in because you get to travel, you get to move around all day. It's a hustle, but he's a hustler. He can hustle. Because some people don't like hustling and doing like sales, but he can do it. And he was like, well, I don't know if I want to waste all the knowledge that I learned in pharmacy school. And I said, like, well, you only have one life, you want to waste that doing something you don't love? And he's like, oh, I guess that's true. And I always tell that because it's like so important to know what we really value and who we are, because otherwise you're going to spend like 30 years of your life doing a job that you hate. And then 30 years later, you're like, God, I wish I'd done something else. Now is the time to do it. And unfortunately, some people are too like, we get older, and sometimes when we get older, we can't physically do the things that we used to do 30 years before. So,
I think actually that really brings to mind the idea that as a kid, we're kind of pushed in a direction, right? Growing up, and almost instills fear in us to go out and pursue what we think it is, because we don't want to displease somebody. We don't want to disappoint them, because, oh well, they thought we were going to turn out to be a doctor, but here we are as a wilderness meditation guide, something something
mhm.
off the wall. And being able to really embrace who you are, not so much at the cost of everything around you, but just at a willingness to accept whatever the outcomes may be, is really something that a lot of us need to spend more time learning how to wrestle with and tame that beast of fear.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I had mentioned my personality types. I separate into four major groups, and then within those four major groups, there are four animal types, making 16 animal types, if I did the math correctly. But the major group, the one that makes up about 50% of the population, their number one value is safety and security. And I think sometimes that becomes an issue when they kind of push that value on others, because like you were saying, like I think we pick jobs like, oh, you should be a doctor or you should do this because I think it makes us feel secure. Like we're like, okay, if I do the things that my parents tell me to do, if I go to school and I take the linear path, then my life will turn out okay and I won't have to worry. Like I won't die at an early age, and I'll always have money, and whatever concerns that might be out there, I will not have them. And I, like I said, I think that can be a problem because we're not taught to take life as it comes, you know? Like, I think it's great that you're teaching people with animals because, you know, animals don't have that luxury, right? Like, the world is dangerous and it is dangerous for us too, but it's okay because we also have the means and the instincts within us to be able to deal with that and handle that and make the best of it. But I think so many times we coddle ourselves, and thus when adversity really does hit, we don't know how to deal with that. You know, I have a lot of students who I had a student who was like so sad and depressed. I'm like, oh, what happened? He's like, I got a B. I'm like, you got a B, like an overall grade or what? He's like, no, I got a B in a test. I'm like, you got a B in a test? And he's like, yeah, it's the first B I've ever had. And I'm like, and I was like kind of laughing. I didn't want to laugh out loud, but I'm laughing in my head. I'm like, oh. And I was just saying, and I just told him, you know what? This might be the best thing that's ever happened to you. And he couldn't believe me that I would say that. I'm like, yes, I think you'll be fine. You know, I think if you can't handle getting a B on a test, I always tell my students, how are you going to handle life when it hits you? How are you going to handle when your parents die? You know, because your parents are going to die before you. If all happens to the best of life, your parents will die before you, as opposed to you dying first, you know? And how are you going to handle that? Like, if you can't handle getting a bad grade on a test, you know? So
That's where a lot of practice in those simple moments come in, especially when times are abundant, when things are good. You know, if you rest on your morals, then when the adversity or the storms of life come, yeah, you're going to sit down and you're going to think, because life is a matter of just like the way that a squirrel lives. You know, they're always stocking up for winter. They spend the good part, the nice part of the year harvesting, looking for nuts, burying everything that they can be. And then it doubles up when fall comes around. So that way when winter comes around, there's food. And these are the kind of lessons that I utilize animals for, to show these sort of things. But it applies in a way that when we go through and we experience the joys of our life, we got to continue to set new expectations for ourselves. We got to continue to push the needle forward and build with the resources that are around us while setting some of that aside. So when you think about it from an energy standpoint, when things are good, my energy is high. I'm happy, I'm excited, I'm ready to go. But when things are bad and things are down, I don't want to move. I just want to sit here and I want to do the self pity and everything else, wait for somebody else to come along and fix the problem. If we can learn how to balance and practice in a comfortable situation when the adversity rears up, which it always does, it's what life is, then we're able to carry ourselves through that storm and realize that even though things are breaking down around us, just like this rain that's going down right now, it's here right this minute, but it's going to blow out and then the sun's going to come back out. And that's, you know, for me personally, as a father, that's something that I've instilled in my kids. And when you don't grow up in an environment that's one of the things that you're taught, it can be difficult. It can be challenging when you get out on your own. So having conversations like this at your fingertips, or being able to explore these things with an open, willing heart, it gives you an opportunity to go back and reframe all those different things that you might have missed out on, which is what, between the work that I do, the representation of animals that you do, it makes it fun. It makes it like being a kid and brings out that childlike excitement and curiosity. Like, oh man, I'm like a bear. What does a bear do? Okay, a bear goes out and does the X, Y, and Z, and this is his position in the order of things. I could model myself after that. I can do X, Y, and Z, and I can find my role within the tribe or the community doing that sort of thing. So that's really where I feel like these sort of things become so important and so cool, because it's fun. These almost fall into the distractions that we're taught are acceptable and okay to be a part of our daily lives. We listen to a podcast and this conversation on our phone. We're taught our phones are like, part of our hand. So it's so easy to click. It's just natural. And you're gaining that wisdom or that little bit of a lesson out of it. And it helps.
Yeah, my favorite quote from Nietzsche is I always mess it up, or I'm always paraphrasing it, but it's true maturity consists in regaining the seriousness one had as a child at play. And I just love it because, so often when we're young, we want to be adults, quote unquote adults, right? And like, but what is an adult? Like, what is it? Adult, like being an adult, having a life that you don't love, you're boring and you're just doing dutiful things. And it's like, I'm responsible and I'm doing the things that I don't want to do because I'm an adult. And that's what adults do is they do things when they're miserable. And it's like, no, actually, maybe maturity and true maturity is like you were saying, like that joy that we have and like when we have something fun, because we're much more likely to fight through it and fight through adversity and do great things when we're really passionate and truly passionate about it versus when we feel like we have to do it. I don't think anyone is great at something that they feel like they have to do versus do they really love it or not.
That's definitely what inspired the transition for me. Having the normal 9 to 5 grind daily job. I was good at it, but I didn't enjoy it. So it wasn't something I really put all that effort to. It didn't speak to me. And then having this project, as more of a passion project on the side and realizing that it could be utilized in a way that would do some good.
Mhm.
And it would speak to my heart. It would speak to my values. Became something that it made it a no-brainer. It's a scary situation at times.
Mhm.
However, getting back to one of my original talk therapy sessions, I got this chapter going when, my therapist mentioned to me, sometimes you don't need to know what's coming in. You just walk the path because it expresses the authenticity in your heart.
I like
That's
that.
something, it's a path that a lot of us kind of overlook because we get caught up in the safety and security of things within the world that we've built. We don't look at the natural world to find that inspiration to go out and build a lodge per se that speaks to who we are.
Mhm. Yeah, I just had a friend who we had a whole conversation about how she really dislikes the job that she's been doing for the last 10 years. And she's like, I want to like, what I really want to do now? I want to learn how to weld or I want to learn how to do carpentry because I just want to be able to like go out and build things, in the actual space of the world. She was a graphic designer. And she's like, I don't even like doing the graphic design. I don't want to stand in front of a computer all day long. I want to like do things and make use of my talents in the physical space. Um, and I think that's kind of a cool thing because I do think it's just hard not to feel some kind of connection and meaning to like the actual physical things that we can create in the world.
That's something you have to have. I mean, if you're going to have that confidence that you need to get where you're trying to try to write the story you want, you got to have some level of mastery on a daily basis. You got to have that one thing that you truly feel like you achieved because you wanted to, not because you were obligated to.
Yeah, and I always say like some of the problems with some of the personality stuff out there that I see, like Strengths Finder or something, where they're like, "Oh, you're like this, and that means you're going to be good at this." I'm like, well, your personality doesn't dictate what you're good at. It just dictates what you value and what you're more likely to love. And I think the things that we love, we tend to do more and we'll practice it over and over and over again because it doesn't feel like work. It feels like play. I mean, I remember playing basketball as a kid and I loved basketball. I still love basketball, but I remember shooting hoops like at 10:30, 11 p.m. at night because I had a little hoop over the garage in my house. And that never felt like I could do that for hours and it would feel like 10 minutes had gone by. And that's how we get good at the things that we love. We just do it. But like if you were to tell me like, oh, be a great accountant, I think I would be a terrible accountant because I would spend no time trying to like put together numbers and things like that. I would be terrible at that. So I do think it's important to find our personalities because generally that helps us. It helps lead us to what we'll love, not necessarily what we're good at. But if we love it, then we probably can be good at it.
Well, I mean, the things that we love, the things that we enjoy, and the things that we become good at all come from understanding their personality. But, when it comes to seeking out help in order to do that, a lot of the time we pick up the ball, but then we set it back down because it's so cut and dry and so boring, because there's nothing outside of some words that we read. But when you present it in a way that, the system is done, it makes it a sense of discovery. It makes it a journey. It makes it about connecting with yourself as well as, whatever else comes into that circle, which is what we all need. It's, I feel personally, I feel that's what we're lacking in school nowadays.
Yeah. I mean, it also is very probably indicative of your own personality type, right? Like that's a huge value of yours, like finding like the way you use journey and finding yourself, a self-discovery. That's I call them shamans as opposed to, the gatherers who seek safety and security. Shamans seek self-knowledge. And so in a way, it's also their role not just to seek their own self-knowledge, but they take it upon themselves to help others like connect to that too. So it seems like that's what like the journey you're on. I mean, I'm a shaman as well, so like clearly that's what I also enjoy doing as well. It's like I love that feeling when someone's like, oh, like when it really clicks with them, and when that where it clicks where it's not like an information based epiphany where they're like, oh, now I know what the theory of gravity is, but it's more like understanding the importance of gravity or the importance of something. I love that epiphany that students get.
So what brought about the epiphany moment for you? Because I love hearing about these sort of things. Mine was pretty simple, but I want to hear yours.
Yeah, I would probably I can't pinpoint a specific moment, but actually I can pinpoint the specific thing that got me to have the epiphany. Which when I was a kid, I had a personality that was not that similar to the people around me, and it's just kind of a lesser common person or a less common personality type. And I just remember always feeling like, oh, I feel kind of weird. I don't feel like I never felt left out because I was pretty talkative, so I was always around people, but I was one of those people who was always around people and yet still felt kind of lonely. And I remember my dad, he came up to me one time, he's like, you know what? At the end of the day, no one cares except you. So you just got to do what you want. No one's going to care anyway. So just do it. And I was like, oh, like, and that was like the epiphany moment where like, you know what? He's right. If I don't, no one's going to care more than I do about my own life. So I should just like do what I want to do and be who I want to be and just have confidence in that. And, and I continue to live that way since then, with a lot of ups and downs, but like, I think that was the epiphany moment for me when he said that.
See, mine was repeating the same circle over and over and over again. And then sitting in my truck, looking in the rearview mirror, realizing that wasn't working. And
Hmm.
then ultimately hitting rock bottom and then rebuilding my way up. And then I discovered a book called The Wind is My Mother by Bearhart. And there was a quote in there where he talked about, when you discover your purpose, it's not necessarily something that you seek out. It's something that's always been in your heart and a part of your personality. And when it shines through and you find it, it's the most beautiful thing ever. And it's as if a cup that is overflowed. It fills up and you just want to share it with everybody and help them along the way. And I I feel like that's been the most beautiful way to express the way this whole thing has come about for me.
That's awesome. What was if you don't mind me asking, what was the circle? Like, are you mean like that same circle over and over again? Do you feel like it was with work or was it just overall life in general?
The circle was based around the idea of being afraid to sit with myself. So I always had to fill it with, a relationship or somebody. And never turned out very well.
Hmm.
We'll put it that way. No, to put it simple. And sitting there in the truck in the rear view mirror, I was facing being homeless and having everything taken away from me. So that was the moment that I realized that. And there were some more hiccups along the way. Stumbled onto a few directionary stepping stones, and ultimately, I discovered what my personality traits were enough to embrace my strengths and my weaknesses.
That's awesome. I think I have a good idea of what animal type you might be. That's just in my mind. I could be wrong. Sometimes I'm wrong, but some of the things you said, I'm like, oh, okay. Like,
All right,
it's,
hit me with it.
I think so. Once again, in my book, there are 16 different animal personality types, but there are four major groups. And so I already said your major group is probably a shaman. Not probably, it's definitely a shaman. Just everything you've said about like discovering pathways and journeys to self-discovery, that's the number one shaman value is self-knowledge. 100%. They will almost always choose that over like safety, security, and visceral excitement, that kind of thing. And I think you're a humpback whale. That's one of
A
the shaman.
humpback whale.
Yes, a humpback whale. Also, I mean, I'm also kind of cheating because I know what you do with wilderness meditation, wilderness meditation, and humpback whales are like, if someone says they meditate, it doesn't mean that they're a humpback whale, but like with the first personality type I think of when I hear meditation is a humpback whale, and one of the first personality types I think of when I think of like nature and being out there, like and connecting to nature, is also a humpback whale. So though that combination of the two, um, lends me to that guess. Um, but I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm right.
I like it. I can't say I've encountered one yet enough to have an experience, but I like it. It gives me a new animal to research and to work into things and understand a little bit better.
I think of humpback whale as like I use that as a symbolism of they're out there in the water, and when I think of water symbolically, I think of water as being very like meditative and very intuitive and kind of going with the flow of life, right? Like you're just going with it, but also emotional, right? Like water can be up and down, right? So it's not like always peaceful, but it can be peaceful, but it can also be turbulent. And I think shamans in general can have a very turbulent inner life. Maybe not necessarily outside, but can definitely be turbulent on the inside. And so that's why I think of a humpback whale. And also, they're not solitary because they have pods, but I do think of them as kind of floating there out in the middle of the ocean, wide ocean, and in their meditative state. I think that's why I picked the humpback whale to symbolize that type.
See, I love the representation of the water in the aspect of the turbulence because it's internally, because a lot of the time I choose to not let that be seen. A lot of the time it goes back to that quest for or for self wisdom and all the different trails and paths along the way. Is you build up enough muscle and understanding of yourself to wade through those waters without the need for them to be seen.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree that a humpback whale would internalize and like keep it. It's the journey is on the inside for them, right? Even though they're experiencing outside, obviously through nature and stuff, but it's definitely like their solid. I won't say solitary journey, but sometimes it can probably feel kind of like a solitary journey because you're going on it by yourself essentially. Just that journey of self.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if anyone can go with you on a journey of self discovery. That doesn't seem to make much sense. You know.
I've had a few key characters along this journey of self discovery, so they can play a very supportive role. In fact, that's what I do. Is I'm not walking the journey for you. I'm not providing you the healing. However, I'm here to support you along the way. But in return for that support, what I do is I ask for you to believe in the effort that you're putting forth, the things that I'm showing you, to, essentially align yourself with the understanding that all of this work is going to pay off.
Yeah, you're like it's like everyone is the main character in their own story, right? But you're like the colorful side character that's very supportive, right? That's you're like the Kramer. I don't know. Or
I love that. That's actually very accurate. Very well put. So as our time comes toward the end though, let people know how they can get in touch with you, what you got going on, what you got coming up, all those good things.
if you want to learn more about my personality type methodology, you can always go to, I have two websites because one is more, you can take a test, and that's utopiaproject.com. And you can actually take the test to see what animal type you are. And that's utopia with a YOU, like YouTube, like finding yourself, finding your utopia through you. And then my other site, which I use to for my life coaching, is projectutopia.com. So you just kind of reverse those things. And I also have a book out, and my book is on personality typing, and it really teaches people to be the personality test themselves. Because I always say, you take a test online, that's great, but really, you should trust yourself and your own intuition, and you can build up that intuition by buying my book, The Power of Personality. And you can get that anywhere you buy books, Amazon, or if you don't want to support Jeff Bezos, buy it on bookshop.org or something. But yeah, that's pretty much how people can get a hold of me or contact me.
Awesome. Well, it's been a lot of fun. I want to thank you for taking the time to get together and have this conversation. I know we didn't get into the animals as in depth as we planned on. We'll have to get together again and do that another
Oh
time
yeah.
soon.
But see if you're a humpback whale. Do that beforehand. I really want to see if I'm correct. I feel like I am on that.
I feel like I'm going to do a little mini series over on TikTok about it or something to really sort this thing out. And then we'll reconnect and I'll let you know how that turns out.
Awesome. That sounds. I had a great conversation. I'd love to do it again.